right, there we go. Trent, over to you.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get this thing kicked off because obviously the main reason most of us are here is just to hear Sydney. So I mean, Sydney is a great individual. Andrew and I know Sydney for several years, and she knows her stuff. So we want to get into that main. But with that being said, we do have some housekeeping slides to get through. So let's go ahead and get through those a little bit. So the agenda today is obviously we've got some housekeeping items, some Adobe updates, our upcoming meetings, which is going to be good for all those here locally. We'll talk about SLC, Salt Lake City MOP Slack session, and then, as I mentioned, the main event. Hopefully, if you've been to a mug in the past, this should not be any surprise to anybody. Basically, don't pitch anything, don't contact people. If something's used in the presentation today by Sydney and stuff in regards to use case and stuff, don't share that information unless she says it's okay to do that, then same with all the ones in the future. So once again, nothing should be surprised along those lines. Talk about, we're re-recording. So hopefully it should be not surprised by that standpoint. So if you have any questions, like I said, you can log off and we get you the recorded later, or just kind of hang on from that standpoint. A few things from Adobe now. One, obviously the big deal that's coming up here is the Adobe Summit. That's happening here towards the end of March. It's in the infamous Las Vegas, and also online as well that they've done in the past. So make sure that if you want to attend either in person or online, that you sign up. There's going to be lots of sessions out there. Pick and choose the ones you want to participate in from that standpoint. And just out of curiosity, if everybody want to raise hands and stuff, like the virtual hand, so to speak, how many people are planning to go to Summit this year? Just out of curiosity. Like a few, two or three. That seems to be kind of the direction lately, or the past couple of years, right? So we see, at least from our standpoint, even though Salt Lake down to Vegas is just a hop, skip, and a jump. It's not that far, but we see a lot more people really doing the online versus kind of in person. But for those that attend, it'd be great activity and opportunity for you there. Adobe Marketo is also promoting this stuff. This is the first time I saw this. I don't know, Sydney, if you've seen this along the lines, but they're saying there's an email series here about if you've inherited an instance, that there's kind of a nurture campaign that goes on, that you receive about 10 emails over basically 4 to 5 weeks, some tips and tricks about how to update when you inherit a Marketo Engage instance along those lines. Might be good if you're actually into a new organization or just some other information along those lines. So feel free to do that one. And you can scan the QR code now to sign up for that. So you'll be part of a nurture program from Adobe. And if not, no big deal either. But once again, these slides and stuff will be available if you want to sign up after the fact, but something to participate in. From that standpoint, we also have, here in Salt Lake City, this is something we've had for about a year now, that there's been feedback from several other, lots of people overall that want to have something local from a Slack perspective. So we've created our local Slack community along those lines. So the SLC MOPS channel. It's for anybody and everybody from a standpoint across different platforms perspectives. So you get that visual with the colors there with our icon. We actually have about 85 or 90 people already joined this time, so feel free to join and participate from that standpoint. There's a channel for Marketo, one for HubSpot so far, and a couple other ones from that standpoint. So feel free to join in, provide some insights, perspective, engage, add another Slack channel to the many ones that we all have. Try to stay on top of it. But we'd love to have you join us. All right, so the big things. What is our plans for this next year? Andrew and I may be a little aggressive this year, so we'll see how it flows out again. So we have a series. These are the ones that we have currently planned today. So right now, obviously today's 21st. So we actually have our first meeting. This is a kickoff for 2024, a virtual meeting from that standpoint. We were going to have an in-person meeting next month on the 20th. We're still open to topics. So if there are some topics that people would like to see, feel free to shoot a note to Andrew and I, either in the chat here directly, LinkedIn, email, whatever the case may be. We're open to that from a perspective. Then there's obviously the Adobe Summit. And then the one in April will be actually an in-person meeting. And this is the one that's been been doing for several years now, but basically a summit recap and tips and tricks. So for those that attend the summit, whether in person or virtually, it's basically kind of a group session to talk about what you hear, what you learn, what you like, what you dislike from a standpoint, provide some insights and perspectives from everybody. We have a really good one in May, and the 22nd. It's going to be at the Adobe offices in Lehigh. So kind of put that far into your calendars. It's depending on where you're at. It could be a little bit of a drive, depending from that standpoint in the valley down to Lehigh. But this is going to be actually a combined meeting with not only the Marketo user group, but also the analytics user group. So we're going to have a combined meeting between both organizations, and then we're going to be holding it in person at the Lehigh Adobe offices. So get that on your calendar from that standpoint. We have one in June. That'll be our summer barbecue bash. We don't know exactly what it's going to be, but we thought barbecue and summertime go together, so we're going to figure something out along those lines. So we've talked about some things like, hey, do people want to go like Top Golf or something like that? Who knows, right? So something's in play that we'll figure something out over the next couple of 3 months, but that'll be in June. July, August, we'll give everybody a summer break off, kick it back up in September, again in October. And then if all goes well, we'll try to do our holiday marketing event again in the December timeframe. And we'll see how, if Andrew has survived this year again. So from that perspective, but any of these topics along the lines in regards to, September, October, the one in March, if you have any ideas in regards to topics and themes and suggestions, we're very open to that one. And anybody, actually not just us, but also if you want to also say, hey, I have this really cool thing I've done in Marketo, this program rollout, or kind of a unique way you've done something that you think is pretty cool. We're definitely open to having people present and speak kind of just kind of showcase what you've been doing. So that's not a bad thing at all. So, because we all learn, there's always different ways to slice and dice this beast. And so it's always good to kind of hear insights and perspectives from everybody. So feel free to let us know. So up to that point, any questions so far? Kind of fast, down and dirty from a standpoint. Because, we want to, do our main presentation here with Sydney. Sydney brings a world of experience. She is the co-founder of ME Collective. She has been 4 or 5-time champion. I can't remember.
That's an embarrassing. I can't remember either. I think 4. 4 sounds right. Let's say 4.
She's been around the block with Marketo for lots of years. She's like I said, co-founder of ME Collective. She's also a co-host of a podcast called Pretty Funny Business. And if you haven't heard about it, it is pretty funny. They laugh a lot, and you still get things out of it, actually. So with her and Lauren, from that perspective, she is a connoisseur of sandwiches. So don't get her. If you want to know if it's a sandwich or not, Sydney is the person to go to understand whether or not it's really a sandwich. So if you have questions at the end, you want to know if a hot dog's a sandwich or not, she can let you know.
That's going to be a whole separate mug. We're not going to go down that road.
She lives in the New York area, and with a husband, is it 2 kids, 2 children?
2 kids.
You have 2 kids already. I know. I remember your first one when it was born, and the second one. That's crazy. But so anyway, so with that being said, Sydney is a great person. Love working with her. Love hearing her insights and perspectives. So we're going to turn the rest of the time over to Sydney for the next 45 minutes. It's her stage, and feel free to take it and however you want. And then, questions along those lines, Sydney, you kind of manage your presentation however you want to.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the kind words, Trent. That was so, so nice. What a great introduction. And I would like to say once again to everyone here that you guys are so lucky that you have Trent and Andrew, because they are really doing the most out here. That calendar of events for this year, that's probably twice as many things as I'm doing with my mug. So they are truly amazing, putting on really great stuff for you guys, getting really great content out there. That's awesome. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, and this is a presentation that I did at Mapsapalooza this year, or I guess last year now in 2023. And I'm excited to go through it with you guys today, but I did want to just start by saying, like, I've done this presentation before several times at this point, and I am also going to give you a link to watch the full recording of it with my co-presenter. So this time, I think it is the most fun if it's as interactive as possible, right? So if you guys have questions or things that come up while I'm going through this, please feel free to interrupt me, unmute yourself, jump in. Trent or Andrew, if you guys can be monitoring the chat, because I don't think I'm going to be able to look at it while I'm looking at my slides, and just pop in if anyone has like an anecdote to jump in with, or anything you want to dive into deeper and discuss. I'm really happy to use the time that way, and I think it just makes it more fun for everybody. I will also give you just a little disclaimer that I talk super fast, and it's something that I am working on, but I'm probably at the peak of my performance at this point. I don't know that I'm going to get much better. So if I go too fast, if you want to go back over anything, again, feel free to stop me, or, watch back this recording at half speed is probably a good idea too. As Trent said, I'm co-founder of Emmy Collective, co-host of Pretty Funny Business. This is how you can find me out there in the world. Would love to hear from you guys. And this is the link to the full version of this presentation. It's not gated. I'm not taking any information. This is just the full recording and the slides. So don't stress about like taking notes or anything like that. If there's something that you feel like we didn't spend enough time on, or if we get too sidetracked, just know that this is all there for you. All that content's there for you. And feel free to reach out to me after this also if you have any questions. So today we're going to talk about original processing. Trent and Andrew were actually looking for someone to talk about lead enrichment, which is super important. And I would say one component of this, certainly something that we will touch on here. But I think original processing is kind of a more interesting way to look at this problem of making sure that all the leads coming into Marketo are doing what they're supposed to do. So I wanted to start by just posing a question. What happens when new leads are created in your Marketo instance? Is that a question that you can easily answer? Do you know what is supposed to be happening when new leads come into your Marketo instance? It can be a lot harder than you think. You may have person has created triggers all over the place, especially if you have lots of different marketers in your instance. It's possible they're just throwing those in whenever they feel like it. And then, other processes that are kicked off before you realize it, things can get very unwieldy very quickly. This is like probably one of my top favorite GIFs to use for anything MOPS related. It's so good. So what is original processing? This is the consolidation of all of the processes that should happen upon new record creations. This is an operational program. It's centralized, meaning that it happens in one place for everyone in your instance. This is a way to take everything that should happen upon lead creation, consolidate it into one place, and make sure it happens in the right order before your sync to Salesforce is initiated. This means that you will have only one person has created trigger in your entire Marketo instance. Only one single guy. And you may already know this if you've been using the Salesforce and Marketo sync for a long time, but this is one of those things that I think is easy to kind of miss. If you have the native integration set up with Salesforce and Marketo, it's easy to think of this as just, it's like a bi-directional sync. Everything that comes in is going to make it to Salesforce. And that is true, but you do have to initiate the creation of a new record in Salesforce after a record is created in Marketo. So that person actually won't get caught in that every 5-minute batch sync between Salesforce and Marketo unless they have gone through a sync to Salesforce flow step or a sync to Salesforce campaign flow step to be created via the API. So this is a way to make sure that is happening very purposefully, that you have gotten all of your checks in place before you create that person in Salesforce. Because we know once they get created in Salesforce, that's when other people start poking their nose in and saying, oh, it didn't route, I didn't like how this looked, or whatever, the title didn't make sense, why did you give this to me? So let's try to minimize the amount of BDRs that are yelling at us. That's like my primary objective always. this is what this looks like. I'll just give you like a quick overview to give some context. It might make a little more sense when I start explaining this. So literally one person has created trigger. Nowhere else in your entire Marketo instance should you be using person is created except for this one campaign. It's not gated. Everyone that's created goes in here and it's set to run only once because, you know, in theory, people should be created only once. We'll talk about merges later. And then this is everything that should happen upon new record creation. They're initiated from here. So I'm not saying let's cram everything we need to do for lead source processing and everything we need to do for data enrichment and everything we need to do for data standardization. I'm not saying we're cramming all of that into one program. Those definitely need to live as separate programs. But for new record creation, we are initiating it from one single place. And then last is your sync to Salesforce flow step. The reason that you want to do this, there are a lot of things that we do in marketing apps. Well, I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for everybody. There's a lot of things that I like to do because I'm like, oh, it will be so much cleaner and more organized and more efficient, and I will like it and it will make sense. And it's really hard to communicate the business value of you spending your time in that way. Like, how is this impacting the bottom line? You know, like why are we doing this? Why are you spending weeks and weeks redesigning this? The thing that makes the most sense to talk about to external teams and to bubble up to your boss is speed to lead. How long does it take from when someone fills out a contact sales form on your website before they get in the hands of a sales rep? We absolutely monitor all the time, right? Like, what is the MQL follow-up? How quickly did sales respond to this lead that I passed them and told them was really, really important? But you need to make sure you're holding up your end of the bargain there too. How long are they sitting in a campaign queue or going through all these different processes or failing to sync with Salesforce for these really hot leads that are super important? So that's a good way to talk about this to everyone else, and is certainly a business value of this. For you and for your team, this gives you a lot of control over the scale of your operational processes in Marketo. By creating this in a centralized way, by using synchronous processing, you are able to make adjustments to the order of processing when new records are created. You're able to just have a little bit more visibility and control to make sure that things are getting in the hands of the right person the first time, because they have the right data that is the cleanest it can possibly be before lead routing is initiated. And then no more leaky funnel. Make sure that everyone actually makes it to your CRM. I had a spicy post on LinkedIn and definitely got mildly canceled by sales recently about using validation rules or not using validation rules and restricted pick lists in Salesforce. My hot take is that we should just not have, none of these things should apply to the Marketo Sync user. Just unrestrict the pick lists, stop the validation rules, just let the data get into Salesforce. Even if it's a little bad, you should still get there. And that's probably because I have a little trauma from the client that I worked on this with. But if you are seeing those sync to Salesforce failures all the time in your notifications tab, if you're getting lots of why do the campaign members not match up to the Marketo programs, this will give you some more control over understanding why those errors happen and how to prevent them. And then just give your team back their time and peace of mind. You know, no one's favorite part of month is chasing down random error reports from other people in your organization. This will give you the ability to be a little bit more proactive with your time. Today, we're going to go through some architecture terminology and methodologies. These are things that, to be perfectly honest with you, were not part of this presentation when I created it the first time. And I got the feedback. It was like, you know, you can't just throw out words like synchronous processing without defining it. Not everyone knows what that is. So we'll talk about that. We'll go through how to actually build this. And then if we have time, we'll go through the case study of how I did this with a client. I also tried to take their name and logo out everywhere because they only gave me permission to use their name at Mopspalooza. Clearly, I missed that here. So everyone just avert your eyes. Architecture terminology. So this is something that you are likely familiar with already, but we'll talk about it just in case. You have probably heard centralized architecture versus decentralized architecture, centralized programs versus decentralized programs, centralized forms versus decentralized forms, or maybe you've heard the Marketo word, global forms versus local forms. Centralized processing is any time that you are consolidating things that need to happen for a lot of different people that are not related to a specific marketing campaign. I am in favor of centralizing everything you can whenever possible. A great example of this is lead scoring. So for lead scoring, I would recommend you build centralized lead scoring, an operational program where all of your lead scoring is happening. And instead of saying inside every single content program, when someone fills out this form to download this asset, I will increment their score by however many points. We will say anytime they fill out my global content form in my global lead scoring program, we will increment their score by 20 points, whatever it is. This gives you the ability to make adjustments over time much more easily. You know, when someone comes back to you and says, oh, these content download leads are not converting, we're scoring them way too high, let's change it from 20 points to 15 points. Instead of chasing that down in every single place that you are incrementing the score today, it's just happening in one place. It's a very easy adjustment to make. Decentralized processing is anything that happens in a lot of different places. So anything that's happening in your individual marketing programs is the easiest example to think of. You can't centralize everything. Like, that's why Marketo is valuable. You need to have marketing programs for each of your different marketing assets or initiatives. And there are things that will happen or need to be stamped or whatever that are specifically related to that program. And those are decentralized. Things like changing the program status. Maybe you're doing some sort of stamping of the last asset they engaged with, or setting some program member custom fields. All of those have to be, should be, will be decentralized. But as a best practice, I'm a fan of centralizing as many of your operational processes as you possibly can. And this is an example of that. Okay, and then synchronous versus asynchronous. You know, this is also something that, like, the more I talk about it, the more someone convinces me that I'm using the wrong words here, but I'm just going to tell you what I mean by synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous processing is something that needs to happen in a distinct order. So one process has to completely finish before the next one can begin. Asynchronous processing is when they can happen in any order. I have a little illustration to show you what this looks like. So for synchronous processing, imagine you're texting a friend. This is a real-time chat. You send a message, wait for your friend to respond, then you send another message. You're not firing off a million texts all at once, which is how I tend to text people because I have ADHD. You're having a back and forth conversation. You're kind of like passing the baton back and forth. Asynchronous processing is like sending a mass email. If you send an email to 3 people at once and ask them to do something, they will take that and do it on their own time, when they feel like it, when they have capacity, but you're not waiting for them to do it before the next person can begin. Okay, so there's 3 ways that you can build this that I will go through. Spoiler alert, the one that I like the best is at the end. It's like the Goldilocks, whatever, right? The Goldilocks and the, you know, too much, not enough, whatever. The last one's the best. First one is request campaign. The second is executable campaigns. And then the last one is daisy chaining lists. Request campaigns is maybe something that you are using already in Marketo today. This is a flow step in Marketo and a trigger on a smart campaign where you can basically just push someone from one campaign to another. I like request campaigns. I use them quite a lot. It makes it easy to kind of apply some of the best practices that you may know from coding, if you're a coder at all. Dry is one that we use a lot. Don't repeat yourself and centralize something in one place and then just request it out anytime you need it. Request campaigns are great. This is something that I would consider an asynchronous methodology because you can initiate the campaign all in a row. So you see these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're initiating them all in a row. But on the other side of that campaign, Marketo doesn't really care what's happening. We're not waiting for that process to complete before the next one actually begins. And by that same logic, there's no real mechanism for you to know that all of these processes have completed before you initiate your sync to Salesforce. This is good for instances where asynchronous processing is fine. Like, I think that as kind of a best practice of the concept of having an original processing program, synchronous processing is useful in most cases, but it is possible that you just don't have much going on in Marketo that's really, really dependent on that sync to Salesforce. And this is a little bit more of a lightweight way to build this, a little less processing intensive for your instance. So if you don't have something that's a true dependency or dependent on one another before they get to Salesforce, asynchronous processing could be okay. This is good for low volume instances without a lot of variability in campaign queue timing. So if you are finding that you run into campaign queue backups for quite a long time or with any amount of frequency, you know, or you like run a campaign, you're like, why isn't this happening? Why is nothing happening yet? And you check your campaign queue, it's like 40 deep, trying to process thousands of records at once. This is probably not a good methodology for you. But it is a much simpler build. It's a good place to start if you don't have anything at all centralizing original processing right now. The other thing to note is this is kind of one of those like sneaky, we talk about it under the table. I know it because someone told me, because someone told them, but I had it on good authority from someone who worked with Marketo's product team, that if you look at your campaign queue, you know, you can see that there are some campaigns that are high priority, some that are medium priority, and some that are low priority. And that's how Marketo works through campaign processing. High priority comes first, then medium, then low. Requested campaigns are medium priority campaigns, but amongst the medium priority campaigns, they are the lowest priority. So all the other medium priority stuff will happen first before a request campaign, which means these just tend to move a little bit slower. Again, one of those things that you probably don't run into a lot of problems with this unless you are in an instance of a lot of scale. But the example that I will walk you through in the second half of this presentation was a massive scale, and this was a huge problem for them. The second is execute campaigns. Execute campaigns are new-ish, although, you know, they might be around for long enough now that some people have never known a world without executables. That sounds nice. Execute campaigns are awesome. They are by definition synchronous, meaning they execute a flow step and Marketo will wait for everything in that process to complete before it goes on to the next one. So you see our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. When we execute this top level campaign, we will wait until everything inside that executable, including any other campaigns it may execute, are complete before we will move on to step 2. The downside is it can only go 3 levels deep. So you can execute a campaign that executes a campaign that executes a campaign. But if you execute another campaign beyond that, it will just fail. And, you know, I can't say I blame Marketo for building it that way. We really could have gone crazy if we didn't stop the madness somewhere. But it is something to be very thoughtful about when you're architecting. In this example that you're looking at here, we are executing a campaign that does execute a couple more campaigns. So it is something to just be pretty careful with. This is good for instances that have moderate complexity and do need a synchronous order of operations processing. I would say it is good if you are not already a heavy user of executable campaigns. So if you aren't using these at all, then this could be great. If you're already using them quite a lot, then I would maybe conserve your executables for use inside your other operational programs, because using an executable to initiate the program itself means you're already starting one layer deep. The other limitation is you cannot use wait steps or webhooks inside executable campaigns. Wait steps make sense, right? Like, what do we usually use wait steps for? We're like waiting for a rather arbitrary number of minutes to give something else time to complete before we go on to the next thing. With executable, you don't have to do that, because by the way it works, we are waiting for everything to finish before we go on to the next thing. Webhooks are just due to the nature of what a webhook is and how it works. Marketo can know that it called the webhook, but everything after that is on the side of the API endpoint that you have called. So we don't really get the same kind of feedback loop to know that a webhook has been called successfully, or that whatever we wanted that webhook to do is complete. So the webhook call flow step is just not available at all inside an executable campaign. You can request a campaign from an executable campaign, and that requested campaign can call a webhook. So it's not that you can't get around this, but it does sort of break down what we would be using an executable for. And last but not least, you know, too cold, too hot, just right. We have our list at daisy chain. I will say I was really not a fan of architecting in this way when we first set out on this. I actually had one of the consultants I was working with recommended this. I thought it looked messy. I thought it looked complicated, but it is actually really great. It's not messy or complicated, and it is fast, very, very fast. This is great for really high volume, complex instances. All we're doing here is using static lists as a proxy to control operational actions. So we are adding someone to a static list when we are done or ready to move on to the next step, and then using them being added to that list to trigger the next campaign. Some things to know about this list adds methodology. For this, we only need people to go through this once, right? So we don't, it's fine. But if you were using this for any other reason where you would want people to qualify more than once, this add to list, added to list trigger works even if people are already on the list. So you're not getting like a failure of, oh, they're already on the list, so we couldn't add them. You don't need to remove people from lists like this. There's no point really, unless there is a point. But you don't need to remove them just for the sake of being able to add them again later. You will still be able to add them to the list, even if they're already on the list. This is great when controlling a synchronous order of ops is important. So if you need synchronous processing, this is a good way to do it. And this is good if you're already using executables elsewhere. So you're kind of conserving your 3 levels of executable campaigns for a different type of program. Oops. And that's it, I think, on the list at Daisy Chain. We're going to walk through how to build this. Before we go into that, any questions or anything? Anyone jump in with anything? Give you a moment where I'm not talking.
No questions in the chat, so.
All right, well, everyone fell asleep or everyone's just enthralled and can't wait to go on to the next one. Okay, so how do we build this? What is this thing really? First step is we're isolating our person as created trigger. So a really easy way to do this is to go to your campaign inspector. Once upon a time, campaign inspector was a treasure chest thing where you had to go find the little secret spooky treasure chest hidden somewhere in admin and turn this on as a feature. I think everyone gets campaign inspector by default now. But if you don't see this for some reason, go into admin, find the spooky treasure chest, turn on campaign inspector. This will give you a view of all of the smart campaigns in your instance, and you can filter it down to just active triggered campaigns or batch campaigns or whatever it may be. Or easy thing is to just export this bad boy into Excel or Google Sheets and filter it down to just campaigns that have person is created in them. That's a great place to start. It's not the only thing I would do to try to identify what's going on when someone is created, because there are probably things happening that are not literally triggered by person is created, but are happening on new record creation. So I would just push through a few test leads too, like create someone in Salesforce, watch them sync over, see what happens, fill out some forms on your website, go do a list import, that kind of thing, and just see what operational processes are firing and how they're being initiated. Next, you'll talk to your good friends in sales apps or whoever it is that owns Salesforce. Maybe it's you, in which case, wow, what power you have. Determine what the CRM requirements are for your business. This will be unique company to company. There are some that are true for everybody. Like I think the API has a limitation that you need an email address and a last name company, I think, in order to create a record in Salesforce. But you may have some other special things, like these people need lead source. You have to have a lead source to be created. And there may be some things that are perhaps not a hard requirement, like you will literally fail to think, but are something that's really, really beneficial. Like we need country data standardized in order for lead routing to work properly. Figure out what those are. Talk to your pals in sales ops, get the right fields nailed down, make sure that you have a process in Marketo that is controlling those things, and document that. Now we're going to map out what is interdependent. So if we know what is happening when a person is created, we know what Salesforce needs to happen when a person is created. Now we need to figure out what order it should happen in. So there may be some things that depend on one another. For example, you probably want your enrichment to run before data standardization runs. That way you have any extra little nuggets of information that you may want to normalize or standardize into your standard fields before they go over. Priority also matters here. So one thing that we actually didn't do when we launched this the first time that we went back and changed is for this client, lead source was extremely important. It controlled lead routing, it controlled attribution. It was just super, super important that it was in place before a lead went to Salesforce. We originally had lead source running last. We were like, oh, it's so important. Let's make sure we have all the data points needed to get the lead source correct. But that was irrelevant. We had all the data points we needed to get lead source correct on record creation, so we put it first. That way, if the wheels fall off the bus somewhere, if someone sneaks out of this funnel somehow, at least we got that. At least we got lead source. At least we got our most important thing. So think about what depends on one another and what is the absolute mission critical thing, and prioritize your processes in that way. And then think about what you really need. So now we know what is happening on new record creation. We know what Salesforce really, really needs, and we know what Salesforce likes to have. You want to try to consolidate as much as you can here. You don't need every single operational thing to happen to a person before they can go to Salesforce. There are actually probably a lot of things that you can put into an overnight batch. The way Marketo processing works is they call them workers, which I always think is funny. Like, either this is a made up name or I don't know, it just feels silly. But they have a certain number of workers mysterious worker bees allocated to trigger campaigns and a certain number allocated to batch campaigns. And there's kind of a fungible amount that is extra on your pod that they push to whatever instance needs it the most at that time, the Robin Hood workers. You want to try to conserve your trigger processing power for the things that really, really need to happen in real time. So you don't want a campaign queue created because you decided that everyone had to go through every single step of your data normalization before they could go to Salesforce. And that means that someone is not getting their autoresponder when they download a piece of content right away. Let's conserve the things that need to happen in real time for the things that really need to happen in real time and try to see what we can push to happen overnight instead. And you're increasing your speed to lead, you know, conserving your processing power, but we're also now going to be monitoring how long are you taking to get this lead ready to be in the hands of a salesperson, and let's get that down as much as possible. And then finally, you build it. You know, you just fold in the cheese. Just go build the thing. You have your singular person as create a trigger. Choose the architecting methodology that works best for you and for your business. Really, none of them are bad choices. I just told you which one was my favorite because this is my presentation. I can do whatever I want. Another thing that we added in here later that ended up being really useful is a start time and end time for initial processing. So you can monitor how long that speed to lead is taking. It's good for you to be able to prove to the powers that be that you are speeding this up. And it's also good for you to start to identify if there are some patterns of when this is really backing up quite a lot. So one thing we noticed is our speed to lead was way longer on Tuesdays because we had all of our nurtures casting at exactly the same time. When we spread those out throughout the day a little bit, it gave Marketo some time to catch up, and our speed to lead just had a little teeny bump instead of the hours and hours bump that we were seeing. Another thing that we did is this list add. I think I might cover this a little bit more somewhere else, but we added people to an in progress list when they are in the midst of order of ops for initial processing, which gave us the ability to know if someone fell in a hole and didn't get passed off correctly. If someone stays on that list, in this case, we do remove people from the list at the end of the program. But if someone stays on that list for more than like a couple hours, that's usually a problem. It means that they are not going to be removed. We need to go rescue them, see what happened, hold them onto the life raft. And then someone used that your end processing timestamp at the very end, and then take them to Salesforce. You may be thinking, that's all fine and dandy. However, I am using sync Salesforce campaign flow steps everywhere. And how am I going to be able to control the timing between all of this stuff happening and when they get added to a Salesforce campaign? Because it is decentralized. The word you just taught me, Sydney. And what a great question. Fantastic question. I would like to start by commending you for using the sync to Salesforce campaign flow steps, because it is truly the superior way to sync people to a Salesforce campaign. The one-to-one program to campaign sync, big thumbs down on that guy. Don't use that. There are a couple different ways you can handle this. I didn't go into this in detail here because when I really did this presentation, it was way too long. I will give you a quick little nugget of this, and if you want to talk more about it, then just unmute yourself and we can talk more. Most people have a little wait step. I don't really like wait steps. Most people put a little wait step right before that sync to Salesforce campaign, just to make sure that everything that was supposed to happen had time to happen before we add them to the campaign. And to make sure that they got created in Salesforce. That's the best way to know. So you could do that. It's not beautiful, but it works in like 98% of cases. The other thing you can do is add a choice on your add to Salesforce campaign flow step and check that their SFDC type is not empty, which would mean that they were already created. In that case, go ahead and add them to the campaign. We don't need to wait for anything. Then you can have a separate campaign inside the same program, listening for them to being created in Salesforce for SFDC type being populated, or maybe the ID being populated, whatever it is, you can figure out what the best proxy is for your Salesforce thing. And then just use one add to Salesforce campaign flow step with choices based on what their current program status is. Then you can get them in that way. But that's my hot and spicy take. Thumbs down on Salesforce campaign one-to-one thing. You want to fight about that? Now's your time. Fight me. Okay.
I'd like to hear. I do want to hear why, because I actually really do like the camp at the program level, but I don't seem to have issues. Sometimes people really do. So
If you don't have issues, then maybe you got the blessed instance and yours is just fine. Then I think that if that's the case, you should keep using it, because why not take advantage of that? My issue with it is it looks like it's a one-to-one sync, like a one-to-one bidirectional sync, which would be beautiful if that was true. In reality, if someone fails to sync to the campaign when you add them to the program, it never retries. And you also can't use the sync to Salesforce flow steps to manually re-add them because it's connected to the program. That's my big gripe. It is also nearly impossible to know when that happens. There's not like really great error reporting for, hey, we tried to add this person to the campaign you connected here and it didn't work. You should go figure out why. And a lot of times it's a timing issue, and you lose a lot of control over the timing when it's just in this big batch sync. There are a lot of people that rely on the Salesforce campaign member creation to initiate UTM stamping on the Salesforce side. If you're doing the batch sync, then you not only have no control over how quickly or slowly Marketo chooses to do that. Sometimes it doesn't do it for like hours, like many hours, because they conserve API calls using that batch sync and try to put as many people through at once as they can. Which means if there's like not a lot of people to sync right now, you might be waiting quite a long time. And if you're waiting to do some sort of stamping, then you're probably going to lose that data before it gets there. Those are just a handful of the reasons that I hate it. I do like using it to create Salesforce campaigns because it creates it with the correct response statuses, like the respondent gets checked for your success statuses, all the like names of everything line up correctly. You don't have to worry about, did I check the active campaign checkbox? When is this going to show from Marketo? I like to use it to create them, then disconnect it and add it to the flow steps. That's why.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Oh, gosh, I knew I was forgetting something. The other thing is you cannot limit the number of people that you are adding to the campaign. And in most cases, I would not choose to add people to a Salesforce campaign unless they were in a success status, unless it was something I really cared about sales seeing. Even if you're using Salesforce campaigns for like your attribution reporting, you probably don't care about having campaign members that were just invited to a webinar or were sent an email. It's not really important, and it takes up a lot of data storage in Salesforce, which sales ops people tend to get squirrely about. Anyone else want to fight me? I'm also happy to fight about the restricted pick list thing. No takers. Charlie.
So Cindy, here's a question in the chat. So one is a comment. This is really helpful. Thanks for going deep. So that's a bonus there. The other question that came out says, can you use an original processing approach when the data is not originating in Marketo and come from 3 separate systems? 1 Salesforce, 2 homegrowns, and the Marketo. So
yes, you can. Great question. Ooh, another big question. Okay, great. You absolutely can still use this approach. And in fact, the customer that I built this for was also doing PLG. So they had a lot of data coming from their product. They had a lot of data coming from several different systems, and then Marketo and Salesforce. In that case, we actually ended up batching quite a lot of things. This is like going to be a little bit scary and spicy, but I'm going to say it anyway. We ended up batching their MQL processing. So we were only sending scored MQLs once a day. We actually needed to wait until the data from all those different systems had more time to come into Marketo so we could most accurately understand if someone should be patched in the scored MQL. We did a lot of their lifecycle processing in a batch, actually. So in that case, if you can absolutely do this, it will probably just change what processes really need to go into your original processing and which do not. There may be even more things that you can work into an overnight batch, and that is perfectly fine. But if you were still using, it looks like you were still using, oh, hi, Brittany. Hey, Brittany. If you're still using Marketo and Salesforce, you still have this problem of wanting to make sure that everything is complete before it goes into Salesforce for the first time. Complete just may look like different for you than it does for maybe a more normie B2B SaaS kind of company.
Thanks, Sydney. Yes.
Great. And Jacob, when it comes to add to Salesforce steps in programs instead of one-to-one, what do you do to add program member custom fields? That's a great question. To your Salesforce campaign member field. You know, when I saw this UTM is it UTMs that you were talking about? Yeah, adding campaign member UTMs, how they do that. Yeah. When I saw that they had finally, after all the years that we have had program member custom fields, as soon as program member custom fields came out, everyone was like, this is so great. We're going to use this for UTMs. This is what we've been waiting for. I'm so happy. But they're like, surprised it does not sync to Salesforce campaign member custom fields. Well, then what was the point, Marketo? Why? Finally, they come out with the feature. You can sync directly to Salesforce campaign member custom fields from program member custom fields. Hallelujah. That was the first time that I really critically reevaluated my stance that I should never, ever do the one-to-one program to campaign sync. I really wanted to believe that this would be better, that it was worth the sacrifice. It was worth the cost. Unfortunately, I just saw that it still failed too many times for me to be comfortable with that, especially since we were relying on the UTM stamping on the campaign member for attribution reporting. It was failing too consistently for that to be the way forward for us. That, coupled with the fact that we were not able to pick and choose which statuses went over as campaign members, made the cost benefit just not there. There's two ways, at least that I know of, that you can do still associate the data from your program member custom field or wherever they're coming from to campaign member fields. One is something that most people do, and the other one is maybe a little bit more special and complicated. A lot of people have a process in Salesforce to stamp data from lead level fields into campaign member fields, either on campaign member record creation or on new lead creation. Sponge, actually, Todd Sprinkle put together a unmanaged package to do this pretty easily, or if that is something that you need to do, you can get rolling pretty quickly. It's on their website. I recommend it. They're good people. They do good stuff. So a lot of people do it that way. The other way you can do it is if you're using a data warehouse. This is how we actually ended up building this for this client. We started extracting their UTMs from the form fill activity and then pushing it into Salesforce campaign members through reverse ETL. So that is also a possibility. We also pulled down program member custom fields that way in the cases of someone consuming an asset or doing some sort of marketing touch point that did not have a form fill associated with it, like a content syndication or a list upload or whatever. So, you may decide that for you in your journey, that doing the one-to-one sync is fine, and that having the the program member custom field to campaign member integration is worth way more than the silent failures you may be experiencing. And for that, I'm happy for you. I wish that I felt that way. I wish I did not see this fail so many times that it felt like a non-viable option for me.
I think I'd like to move forward towards some of those other solutions because, yeah, the drawbacks of the one-to-one are quite painful. So that's good.
Yeah, I wish it worked the way that it seems like it should work, but it just doesn't, sadly. All right, anyone else want to fight me? I know we don't have a ton of time left. I can try to breeze through some of this other stuff, or we can stop here if there are more questions. No. All right. Well, we'll go through this part pretty fast, and just feel free to stop me if you need to. So in this example, the customer already had original processing, which may not be where you are starting. They already had centralized but asynchronous processing. They were using request campaign and just running into campaign queues all the time. They have a database of like 3 million people, and like I said, they were doing PLG too. So they had a lot of product sign up data coming in, which meant it was just a really high activity, high volume instance, and this was really not working for them. The biggest problem was that because they were always running into these campaign queues, they had all these processes that were really dependent before the sync to Salesforce could be successful, but there was nothing making sure we were waiting until those were done before we did the sync to Salesforce. This meant that they were constantly missing lead sources, they were constantly missing hand raisers. The Salesforce sync was backed up all the time. The Salesforce sync was failing all the time. Routing was failing all the time. It was just like kind of a hot mess. As a side note, they also had a perpetual Salesforce to Marketo sync backlog of like 600,000 updates deep every single day. It was just a hot dumpster fire. Marketo was like really giving it the old college try, but it was just, we're asking way too much of it. Marketo at scale is a delicate beast. It definitely can operate at scale, but it requires a really, really thoughtful approach into how and what you are asking it to do. But we were seeing it take up to 3 days before someone could get into Salesforce after they were created, which was a big, big problem.
Yeah.
So we flattened original processing a bit. We took out some things that didn't really need to happen in real time, put those into overnight batches, decided what was the most important for them. It was data standardization, enrichment, and lead source. And we simplified it as much as possible. We did the synchronous processing with the lift ads because we needed it to move really, really quickly. And we needed to know that everything was complete before we moved on to the next thing. And most importantly, that everything was complete before we initiated sync to Salesforce. We did lead source. Oh, this is everything this stuff. Lead source standardization, enrichment, all of lifecycle processing, MQL processing, marketability management, tick box, email validation, and lead scoring. And we pulled this down. We looked at our CRO. Oh, I see we're going through the checklist. This is the half of the presentation that my co-presenter did, so I'm not don't have it as ingrained in my brain as the other half. We determined what our CRO requirements were. We looked at what had restricted pick list values, what was causing sync to Salesforce failures, and people without a lead source were a huge problem for routing. And people having incorrect region data were a huge problem for lead routing as well. So we determined that data standardization, lead source, and enrichment must be completed before we can let someone go into Salesforce for the first time. And then interdependencies amongst those, we wanted to make sure enrichment was complete before standardization started because we were relying on enrichment to pull in country data, which was important for standardization so we could set region. And we needed to make sure that scoring and source were always complete before we tried to run scored MQL processing, which is why we ended up moving scored MQL into a nightly batch, which sounds crazy. It sounded crazy even while we were doing it, but a little important piece of context is that they were manually processing all of their scored MQLs daily anyway for 2 months before we launched this. Things were not going well. And then, like I said, making sure enrichment is done before standardization. So this is what we were asking to happen before we sent someone to Salesforce the first time. Person is created, go to lead source, go to kickbox, go to enrichment, go to standardization, go to scoring, go to lifecycle, go to marketability management, and hope all of that is completed before we push them to Salesforce. In our new world, we decided what was most important. We said they would be created, they would go to lead source, they'd go to enrichment, they'd go to standardization. When those were complete, they were sent to Salesforce. Then we were allowing lifecycle, kickbox, marketability management, and scoring to run asynchronous after sync to Salesforce was done. They were not necessary for the record to be created. It did not inform anything related to routing. Nothing was being stamped. It was just not important that those things happened before we got it into the hands of the salesperson. We did not use executables for this because we were already using executables quite a bit in some of the architecture that was being called out from this. So we didn't want to kind of hamper ourselves being one level deep. And we didn't use request campaigns because we actually did a timed test and found that the add to list triggers ran twice as fast as the campaign requests, even though they're both medium priority activities. So what happened here? We had an 88% reduction in speed to lead. We went from this happening in hours on average to minutes or less. 100% successful in the new lead to Salesforce sync pipeline. We were no longer battling constant sync to Salesforce errors. The Mops team was spending basically a full-time employee's worth of time troubleshooting constant cycles of finding issues and then backfilling them. So after this was in place, they didn't have to do that anymore. That person got to go do other things. And it gave us a lot more room to make adjustments over time. So we've already kind of reshifted this a few times, added new processes in, taken some things away, deprecated enrichment vendors, and it's just not a huge deal. It's really easy to fold it into our existing process and make sure it works the first time. Some things that we did that were really helpful. Actually, I recently spoke on the London mug and only talked about this. So we will not have a lot of time to talk about this here, but I would go find the recording for that and watch it too. We timestamped the leads upon creation and completion of original processing. I mentioned that a little bit earlier, which gave us the ability to know what our speed to lead was, and really easy to know if someone fell out of the funnel. We also created some reports to know if there were problems. So for all of this, in each of these processes, we were asking ourselves, how are we going to know this didn't work? How are we going to know that what we expected to happen did not happen? And then you build a smart list to look at the opposite and then set those up on a subscription. My other spicy take is that smart list subscriptions are not nearly as useful as they're supposed to be, because you have to click into the smart list to see if there's anyone on it. And they will send you an Excel sheet, but it's just always there, even if there's no one on the Excel sheet. If you use a person performance report summarized by email address, then you will get an Excel sheet in your report only if someone qualifies for the report. Then we sent these reports to a Slack channel that everyone could monitor together. And I think there's a great example of what that looks like here, but when a report subscription comes to the Slack channel and it has someone in it, there's like a little blue attachment that comes up. So it was very easy at a glance to know if this was something that we needed to investigate or not, and to collaborate on it in that Slack channel. Not true for list aliases. When it goes to everybody, it's easy to assume that if everyone is responsible for it, then someone else will do it. If everyone's responsible, then no one's responsible. There's no real way to communicate that someone is resolving this. And we created these as 0 out reports. So if everything is working appropriately, then the report should qualify 0 people. If something is wrong, then someone will be there. Those are takeaways. We don't have time to talk about them. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I had a great time with you. I do have a few more minutes that I can stay and answer any questions anyone else has if you're still hanging, but otherwise, really appreciate your time. Thank you guys for having me.
Well, thank you, Sydney. I mean, it's always a pleasure to have you there and participate with us. So yeah, agreed, Andrew. Yep, 100%. So yeah, if anybody has any questions for Sydney, yep, she's offered some time from that standpoint. So. Oh, Brittany's come back with another one.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have one more, Sydney.
Yeah. Lay it on me.
Since you said you had time.
I'm convinced our instances flow as molasses because there are 60+ persons to create a request campaign triggers. And it's definitely possible for race conditions between operational programs and marketing campaigns. Okay, so when you talk about this with other people, for you, it's very clear, right? Like, everything's running super slow. I don't like this. I don't think it's working as good as it should be. No one cares about that. No one cares if it's making your job harder. How is it actually impacting the processes that Marketo is supposed to be responsible for? If it is really, really slow, does that mean that it takes a long time for someone to go from form submission to in the hands of a sales rep? Probably. If you have a campaign queue, probably that is happening. Are you losing data that's supposed to be stamped? Are you, for example, when we were having these campaign queue problems with this client, a lot of their lead source filters that were like trying to set the appropriate lead source were time-based, right? Like, oh, did they visit the website in the last 4 hours? Whatever. Do they have this UTM value? So all of those things really start to fall apart if you are running into a campaign queue and the lead source isn't actually processing for like 6 hours after the person's come in. You're losing data, so you can't really make an accurate prediction of what their lead source was. You can't really stamp data that's already been deleted because they've gone through whatever process is supposed to remove the UTMs. So look for those, because that is something that everyone else will care about. Oh, all of our lead source data is incorrect because Marketo is just bricked all the time. That is something that someone will care about and be more willing to allocate resources to solving.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Anything else?
I wanted to make sure I understood the like marketing campaign process. If I remember right, I mean, obviously I'll also review the recording, but I think you said, was it when you're going to like add to Salesforce campaign, you would check, and then if SFDC created date is not empty, then you're able to move forward. And then if it
so you can check. There's 2 proxies to know if someone exists in Salesforce. One is the SFDC type, but I think you also have to check that SFDC is deleted is false, because someone can still exist in Marketo and have an SFDC type, even if they were deleted in Salesforce. So like separately, you should create a batch campaign to delete those people every day. They're deleted in Salesforce. They don't need to be in Marketo anymore. So yes, those are the 2 things. SFDC deleted is false, and SFDC type is not empty. If they have not yet been created in Salesforce, SFDC type will be empty. But you need to just test it, because I find the Salesforce Marketo sync to also sometimes be a special snowflake that just works like a little bit differently in some instances than others. So test it and see what it looks like when a new record is created in your instance. Those are 2 things I would check. And then you can trigger off of SFDC type being populated, or any of the SFDC ID fields that are probably mapped to your Marketo, going from null to not null. Empty to not empty.
Also, separate note, tell Emily Poulton I say hi.
I will. Emily Poulton is actually the person that told me Trent was looking for someone to talk on his mug, so she has brought us
that's
here
great.
today.
It's fantastic. Trent and Emily and I all used to work at RP, so.
Oh, fun. That's nice. Yes, she said my old RP friend Trent is looking. I was like, I know Trent. Trent needs a mug speaker. I'll speak on Trent's
She
mug.
reached out to you before I could even hit start typing.
I know.
Come on, Em.
All right. Anybody else got anything for me?
Okay.
Good. Wrap it
Thank
up.
you very much, Sydney. Very, very much appreciated.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Come back anytime. Literally, seriously, come back anytime.
You have so many events, so many opportunities. You guys are doing too much. You gotta do less, man. You're making us all look bad.
Yes,
Just
we
make a
do
road
need to
trip.
do
You and
less,
Lauren
that
need
is
a big
true.
road trip out here to Salt Lake, so there you go.
There we go.
There you
I've never
go.
been to Salt Lake.
We got to have you out. So come out for the event at the end of the year. We'd love to have you.
Okay, maybe. Yeah, we'll see. Maybe. I might do that.
I'll buy you
All right.
tacos.
Buy
There
us
you go.
over.
Okay,
There
all
you
right.
go.
That's
There
a
you go.
promise. And okay.
No, that's a good one, Charlie.
There it is.
Red iguana.
There you go. Oh, oof, the Mulligan.
Are the tacos a sandwich?
Oh, there you go.
Tacos absolutely sandwich. Of course, tacos and sandwich. Next question.
All
All right, I gotta go, y'all.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
Bye.
Thanks,
Appreciate
everybody.
it.
Have a great rest of the day.
See y'all.